Hey, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to bring you another installment of information from Derick Dillard. A couple days ago, I released an interview that he and I did via email and DMs on Twitter. Through that interview, Derick provided some insight into his time filming, counting on, and being on the show 19 Kids and Counting with his wife, Jill Duggar Dillard. Derick and Jill married in 2014, and he was the first son-in-law welcomed into the Duggar family. Derick and Jim actually met in Nepal, and he and Derick were partners in prayer. And Derick was so liked by Jim Bob that he decided to introduce his daughter, Jill, to Derick. Interestingly, it was that connection with Derick and Jill's marriage that ultimately resulted in her leaving the family, leaving the show, and moving on with her life after something really dramatic happened in 2015. In 2014, their wedding was featured on TLC. It was a humongous success. Jill and Derick's wedding was everywhere, including on People magazine. Derick asserts that they were never paid during their time on the show. He has said on Instagram and on Twitter that Jim Bob was the master of the contracts and he was the person that was paid by the network. According to Derick's own statements, he says that Jim Bob told the kids that they were volunteers for the show, and during that time, anything that they were doing was an effort for them to share their faith with the world and part of their mission to spread the word of God. Derick says that they spent a lot of time working. They were not paid, but he's also saying that the show conflicted and impeded their ability to actually do things as a family that they wanted to do for themselves because of a contract that Jim Bob Duggar had. On Instagram and on Twitter, Derick has stated repeatedly that negotiations between the network, TLC, and Jim Bob were held without the children and without any knowledge by the children. The network, he says, did not have specific contracts with the children and payments were not made to the kids. Instead, the network was to pay Jim and Jim was to pay the children. Except Jim told the kids they were volunteers and they were not actually paid employees. A lot of people have assumed that Derick and Jill left the show because of their non-payment. Derick's brought up repeatedly that the birth of their son, Israel, and the non-payment by the network to help with their medical expenses was a factor of why they left the show. However, it wasn't the reason they left the show, according to Derick. He says that the network made millions of dollars off of Jill's birth of their son, Israel. Israel spent time in the NICU and Jill had a very complicated birth. He said that they had insurance and could pay the premiums and everything needed for it, but because they were not paid and TLC was there, he felt it was a good trade to ask them if they would help. He says the network declined. He asserts that Jim Bob also did not pay them for that time. Around 2017, before the birth of their second son, Samuel, he says on Twitter that he and Jill decided to make a decision as a family to move on with their lives and move away from the show. That fall, in November of 2017, Derick began making statements about other shows on the network, which ended up targeting one of the shows called I Am Jazz and indirectly targeting the child on the show, Jazz Jennings. Shortly after a series of tweets made by Derick about Jazz, TLC put out a tweet that they were no longer working with Derick, that Derick had not filmed for quite some time, and they had no plans to film with him in the future. Now, people immediately ran with the story that TLC fired Derick, but Derick said he was not fired because he did not have a contract with the network. Additionally, he said they had already quit that spring. With so much misinformation going on throughout the years, Derick has used his public platform to share his story about what happened behind the scenes. And recently in an interview with me, he shared that when things were going on, especially in the early parts of their marriage, like them getting married, them having announcing a pregnancy, the gender of their child, and their birth, he says that they had no control of when that information was put out on social media and that they had to get approval from Jim Bob and the network to say anything. Without having control of any life events, they felt out of control. They also were not paid. He also told me that Jill did not want to film following everything that happened in 2015 with her husband, after an In Touch article came out about things that had happened between Josh Duggar, her older brother, and 4 of the sisters, including Jill. Jill had to go on national television and speak to Megyn Kelly, where she defended her parents along with defending her brother and saying that she had forgiven them. Not too many people in the public bought her story, and everyone was outraged with the Duggars because they had lied and misled the public, knowing that they had held on to this secret for more than almost a decade and not told anyone. Oprah Winfrey found out about it in 2006, and it was her finding out and her report to a tip line in Arkansas that ultimately led to the investigation and the police reports that In Touch obtained in 2015. Despite the knowledge of this investigation and despite the ongoing investigation, TLC and Discovery continued on with the Duggars. It's interesting to note that even with all of that, they still continued on with the show. TLC has never stated whether or not they knew anything about it. But after news broke, they quickly cut ties with Josh Duggar, and they claimed that the show 19 Kids and Counting was canceled. Many in the public believed that the show Counting On was a separate show with a new contract, but Derick said no. On Instagram earlier this year, Derick states that 19 Kids and Counting suddenly just became Counting On, and Jim still owned the contract. So even though Jill and Jessa were in the title of the show, they were not paid. Well, after sharing a lot of that information with me, he sent me an email actually a DM on Twitter last night, which I thought, wow, this is probably the most revealing piece of information that I have ever heard. I'll note that everything that Derick has said thus far publicly has not yet been refuted by either the network or the Duggars. In fact, the Duggars have remained tight-lipped and have not responded to any of these allegations. Additionally, the Duggars have clamped down on social media and are consistently now deleting comments about anything related to Jill or any negativity of the things that Derick has said. Instead, they are putting up this front as though everything is fine, even though in November, we know that a team of ICE investigators from the Department of Homeland Security raided a car lot owned by Josh Duggar, as well as visited the Duggar home, the big house, as the fans call it. The Duggars denied that anyone in the family was under investigation, although ICE confirmed the investigation and the involvement of Josh Duggar in the investigation. To date, that investigation is still ongoing, and it will probably be some time before we know more about what's going on, but has not been dropped. So when he told me this new information, this is what he said in a message to me. He said, right now, our family, he said, what I can say is that we are now trying to avoid toxic relationships for the health and recovery of our family. In regards to why he and Jill are not seen as frequently with her family. If you remember, they did not spend Christmas or Thanksgiving at all with the Duggars. He has also stated on Instagram that they are not allowed at the home of Jim Bob Duggar and Michelle Duggar without Jim Bob being there. When I asked him why are they not allowed in the home, he said, we have never been given an answer. He went on to continued by letting me know about some of the payment issues. Now, he has stated repeatedly that he and Jill were not paid, But he did say this. He said, another thing that I can say is that Amy Duggar King was not paid for her time on 19 Kids and Counting either. Amy, who is now bound by an NDA, cannot speak out publicly about the Duggars in any capacity. And it's funny considering the fact that Derick asserts she was never paid. How can you be in an NDA with a show that never paid you? TLC, I would love to know the answer. Now, in regards to departing the show, there's been a lot of speculation through his statements that this all boiled down to money because of a statement he made at one point about the birth of his son Israel and how they were not paid for the birth special, nor did TLC provide them any money for their medical expenses. So obviously the public has thought they left because they weren't paid, and they've painted Derick as greedy. But this is what Derick said to me. He said, also, our departure from the show had less to do with money and more to do with regaining control of our lives. After years, we found that we had been sucked into a pattern of planning our hopes and our dreams, only to find out that what we wanted for our lives really didn't matter. Wow. He continued by saying, for example, we put years of our lives and thousands of dollars of our own money toward a career goal, including airline tickets for interviews, only to learn that there were conditions out of our control, but under Jim Bob's control, that prevented us from taking such a step in our lives. Unfortunately, we learned too late that Jim Bob had a hidden contract that ended up being the only thing preventing us from being able to accept this job position. Again, after much time and resources invested on our part towards this goal. And he said, people wonder why we keep making such sudden changes in our lives. Well, this is part of the reason. So he's stating that he had an opportunity, he and Jill had an opportunity that they were working towards with a new job and a new opportunity. Unfortunately, because of a contract that they knew nothing about, that Jim Bob had control of, he would not allow them to move forward with this job opportunity, which made, according to Derick, he and Jill feel like their lives, their goals, and their dreams were not a factor or a concern for Jim Bob, but rather Jim Bob wanted control of them, wanted control of their story, and he says that made them feel like they didn't matter and that their dreams were just an afterthought because Jim Bob had a goal. This could also explain why the other Duggars don't work. There's constant questions in the media. What does Ben Sewell do? Does Josiah have a job? What does Josh do? Josh doesn't have a car lot anymore. How is he making money? What about, I think John David, he's a constable and an EMT as well as a pilot. Might be the only one that might have a job outside of the Duggar family. But the girls also don't work, which isn't exactly surprising given that they're a quiverful family in a patriarchal network where they believe that women should stay at home, be subservient to their husbands, and make as many kids as possible. That means, if what Derick's asserting as truth is that Jim Bob wants full control of his adult children, wants to control what they can and cannot do without allowing them the ability to move on, because he has a contract that says they can't have work. Derick didn't specify what the work was, whether or not it was another show or whether it was just another job offer that he had received. Before any of this happened, they had been doing missionaries work outside of the country, which makes me wonder sometimes too, is did they send Derick and Jill out because there was conflicts or there was things going on? Was Derick starting to ask questions even back then? And when they did come back, the missionary stuff went away. Derick enrolled in law school, and it was shortly thereafter they left the show. As more and more is unfolding, this seems more about control and about power and money than it does about the well-being and spreading a Christian narrative. That's my opinion based on the information I've seen thus far. We know that Jim Bob Duggar withheld information, protected his son, and did not protect his daughters. We know that Jim Bob Duggar's kids did not go to public school, and Josh did not receive actual counseling from licensed therapists after what happened to him. Instead, they relied on their church, and they sent him to a Christian boarding school for troubled boys. With Josh not getting help, with the girls not getting help, and then him taking those kids, putting them out publicly, and then crying foul when a public organization and public records released through the Freedom of Information Act come out by In Touch, he sues the cops. It's almost funny if you think about it. Now, no one suggests that the information out about the girls should be public, but at the same time, the story was public interest and important given the fact that they were on a national television show. With that being said, there is still ongoing litigation, and Jill is still party to a lawsuit where she and her sisters are suing officers from Springdale, Arkansas. That litigation is still ongoing. They actually had arguments with the appeals court in January. So, Derick and Jill assert that this wasn't about money. It was about not having any control of their lives. And now they're cutting out the toxic members of their lives. And he's also stated that they are not comfortable around certain members of the family, which begs the question, are those members Jim Bob Duggar and Josh Duggar? Who aren't they comfortable with? Jill was seen with her sisters a couple weeks ago when Ginger, her sister, who is now living in California, flew back into town. But Jim Bob was not around. They met at a public place. And my favorite thing about that entire day was that Jill wore pants. As they continue to provide more information, he says, there have been so many things that have led us to where we are and the new direction we are taking. This is just one of them, and we will continue updating fans on how we are taking back control of our lives via social media, including our YouTube channel, Dillard Family Official. I will include a link to their YouTube, and you can subscribe to their channel. They do put out cute videos of the kids as well as updates on what's going on in their lives. Thank you, Derick, for sharing your information with me. Obviously, I did not reach out to the Duggars. They have me blocked on every single social media venue. I have rarely ever even commented, by the way, on any of their social media platforms, and I got blocked because someone tagged me and I responded. It's so weird. So obviously, I must note that this is his version of events. The network obviously has not responded to anything he has said at all, nor have the Duggars at all. So sometimes I feel like silence can be an indication that what Derick is saying could have truth. All right, you guys, I will be back later with more. Thank you so much. Bye.